But what does the economic situation in Russia tell us about Putin's priorities right now, and why he's going to such extent to make these economic policy changes, but also make this shuttle diplomacy?
So I think that the monetary policy of Russia is actually sort of a fascinating topic. One of the most, actually in the whole war, I think one of the most interesting things that goes on that is almost never talked about is what's going on financially in Russia. And that is sort of key. So let's contrast two things. What we have in Ukraine as a unique system is that obviously they're receiving free assistance from everywhere, whether it's the weapons, whether it's for their budget and everything else. This is free money, essentially. Even if it's a loan to be paid off over the next hundreds of years, it's essentially free money. Russia actually has to come up with money to pay for what it's doing. It really has to actually pay these expenses. So the situations these two countries are in are totally different. They're totally unique. In the case of Russia, one of the first things Putin did after the invasion began, I think it was the day after, 2 days after, he gave a speech on national television. And in the course of his speech, aside from outlining why he was doing this invasion, he said a lot of very interesting things. He said, we have new priorities. And those new priorities was the increase of the amount of money spent on pensions, is increase in the amount of money being spent on domestic production, increase in the amount of money being spent on government payroll, in amounts of building within the country, but a lot of different things. And in the end, as you know, whenever the government starts to spend tons of money, that creates inflation. And in the case of Russia, we see the secondary effects of inflation. Officially, the Russian inflation rate, they say, might reach 11% this month or next month. That's a joke. I mean, Johns Hopkins University last week, an economist there came out and said it's about 24% is what he estimates the real inflation rate to be. In addition to that, the key interest rate of a central bank's about 17%. And that's about to go up again. It looks like it's going to get up to 20, maybe 21%. 21% interest rate, that's going to choke off businesses. That kills lending at the local level. And that means that there's going to be less growth. But what do we see that's sort of strange? Typically, you would expect to see all of a sudden job creation decline with that sort of high inflation rate, high interest rate to combat the inflation. We see something very strange. We see that the unemployment rate's like 2%. So how is that possible? Why is the unemployment rate so low? It's an indication of very, very, very high inflation. You're creating jobs even when there's not a necessity to have those jobs. So you're just giving full employment to people. Full employment's not really possible. You don't want full employment in an economy. Ideal unemployment rate's typically about 5%. So when Russia says they have 2%, they're dealing with something very strange. These are all outside signs that the ruble is losing value. As you indicated, the official exchange rate today is about 87 ruble to the dollar. We all know that's a joke. We know that the black market rate's closer to about 150 or so. It's totally different from what the official number is. And we see last week other significant signs of economic instability in Russia. We saw that Moscow exchange, the primary stock market in the country, was sanctioned by the United States. It's no longer able to have access to dollars or to euros or to Hong Kong dollars either. Now, the lack of liquidity that they have and the sanctions that were put on the clearinghouse, which is the one that actually does the buying and selling, the trading of the dollars, it guarantees if your bank is selling dollars that you can sell it to a foreign bank and that sort of thing, was also sanctioned. What's the impact of that? Well, we saw that the Moscow exchange, as well as the clearinghouse, as well as probably 4 of the major banks in the country, all went offline for a number of days last week. It's understood that it was probably to decrease the amount of sales. They didn't want everyone to start selling their assets, or they didn't want anyone to change their money out to hard currency. Likewise, we see that within Russia itself, that there was quite a crisis, I would argue, that till today, Moscow exchange is not allowing after hours trading or early hours trading. And they've changed, I think it's now 9:45 in the morning, opens up their exchange. So they've pushed back the time that the exchange opens. These are all signs that things are not going well in Russia. And so as much as they say that things are going great, we simply don't see that. Pensions in Russia are being eaten up by the very high inflation rate. Putin has pledged to increase the amount of money going to pensions. They're introducing a new tax. I think all understand that new tax is really just a mechanism to try to curb inflation, but it's also a mechanism to raise more money from the war effort. But ultimately, that increase will do very little. Russia is simply lax. Russia's deficit right now is quite large. I mean, it's significant. And they're not able to keep up with what they're doing. At some point, it will have to be that Russia pays for this. And the way that it pays for this is going to be, I think, extremely painful for the national economy.
So I think everyone who remembers their days in economics, particularly on the full unemployment or full employment and inflation. Keep in mind that employers pay high wages, as you say, but then that ultimately begins to what increase wage inflation, and this is something that we are seeing in Russia occur quite clearly, albeit people don't really want to, I think, draw attention to that. Again, to be contrarian, a lot of people will, though, argue or just simply dismiss what you're saying and say, well, regardless of what's happening in Russia, which probably isn't that bad, Europe has, continued to utilize and consume Russian energy, and therefore they're paying Russia even though they're fighting Russia. And so this whole war is pointless, right?